Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. This is a Civil War causes video tutorial. So go ahead and type in as we go along. And I'm going to go along quickly, so make sure that you're not daydreaming here. Okay, remember, this is a slideshow about the causes of the Civil War. All right, from the beginning, Americans were divided over whether to support the new Constitution and its strong national or federal government. The Federalists, again, they wanted ratification of the Constitution. The Anti-Federalists were mainly South. They were against ratification. This is just based on how the Constitution was organized. James Madison was a leading Federalist. Madison and others argued that a strong national government was needed for the Union to survive. At that time, the national government could not even enforce its own laws. And it's important to remember that Federalists held a loose view of how to read the Constitution. George Mason and Patrick Henry were among anti-Federalist leaders who argued that the new national government would have too much power. So in other words, they felt that this new Constitution would weaken the states. They didn't see a Bill of Rights, and they felt that the president could become a king. They held to a strict view of how to read the Constitution. So both these sides have a different way of viewing the Constitution. By the 1790s, this is after the Constitution was ratified, Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton were quarreling and growing apart. Some might say the Civil War started here. So Jefferson, he's in George Washington's administration. He's the Secretary of the State. He was the first political founder of the Democratic Republican Party, which was mainly in the South. Hamilton was the political party founder of the Federalists, who were mostly in the North. So you can see this North-South divide start here, and this is over the Constitution. So in class, I've drawn this on the board many times. The Republicans in the South wanted to keep the most power at the state or local level. They favored states' rights. So you can see by the visual here, again, of course, we have a federal government. That's the Constitution, but they felt it would be important for the states to have some separation. And they feared a strong central government would act like a monarchy. The Federalists in the North said that the United States needed a strong federal government. They believed the federal government would hold the country together and deal with its problems. So again, you could see from the visual there, the federal government kind of had a little bit more oversight. Okay, it would help the states work together more closely. So again, there was visually there's a difference between these two parties. Again, look at the geographical differences. Federalists were strong among northern merchants, again the North. The Democratic Republicans, or Republicans for short, were supported largely by southern farmers. So you've got that North-South divide. The Federalists and Republicans disagreed about many issues. Okay, so these are some pretty prominent things. Remember, these are our first two political parties. The Republicans in the South are led by Jefferson. They believe that the people should have political power. So again, we the people in the United States, think of the Constitution, the preamble, they would really emphasize the word people. They favored strong state governments. They emphasize agriculture, okay, as a way of life. And as we get toward the Civil War, this is going to become more important. They favored a strict interpretation of the Constitution. In other words, read it word for word. If it's not written there, let the states deal with it. They were pro-French, okay. They opposed a national bank. They didn't see a national bank in the Constitution. And they opposed any protective tariffs. We'll talk more about tariffs later. Federalists in the North were led by Hamilton. They believed that the wealthy and the educated should lead the country. So when they looked at the preamble that said, we the people of the United States, they would emphasize the United States. There was something about the United States more so than the people. They favored strong central government, emphasized manufacturing, shipping, and trade, and they had a loose view of the Constitution. So again, they didn't read it necessarily word for word. There was some more opportunity for interpretation. They were pro-British. They favored a national bank, and they favored protective tariffs. So, federal versus state power. Anything that argued for states' rights, that would come from the South. The South felt that the federal government derived its power from rights given to it by the states. Because the states created the United States, individual states could nullify, that means cancel a federal law. So this is pretty powerful language. In the North, arguments for federal power, the federal government derives its power from the rights given to it by the American people. States have no power to nullify federal laws, that means cancel, and states cannot revoke any kind of federal power set forth in the Constitution. So again, you have, once again, the North and the South disagreeing over the Constitution. The Virginia and Kentucky resolutions were far more important than laws that provoked them. They claimed that states could nullify, that means cancel, again, a law passed by Congress. And then again, the resolutions also boosted the idea of states' rights. So again, if you're from Virginia or Kentucky, you did believe in states' rights, which again means that the states could cancel a law if they felt that it was not in the Constitution. And again, Federalists in the North found the concept of states' rights to be threatening to the new nation. So again, to put this simply, it's how you read the Constitution. If the Federalists wanted a national bank, they felt, because they read the Constitution loosely, that a national bank would be in the nation's best interests. Okay, Congress could indeed create a law that's necessary and proper. The South said there is nothing in the Constitution that says a national bank. It should thus be left to the states. So both sides, the North and South, felt the other would literally ruin the country. When you look at the debt we owed, okay, our new government wasn't collecting enough money to repay its debt. You can see by the visual that we owed a substantial amount of money. Our Secretary of the Treasury, that was Alexander Hamilton. He's from New York, the North. Again, he developed a plan to solve the financial crisis. So this is all during George Washington's administration. Again, he came up with a plan where the federal government would pay all state debts. It would absorb everything. A national bank would be created, and a high tax on imported goods would be created. This would force people to buy more American-made goods, which would help our own economy. That was his plan. Now, many Southerners opposed Hamilton's plan for the government to repay state debts. They felt that each state should repay its own debts. Hamilton believed that his plan would encourage future investors. So if your country is so broke, it's going to keep people from wanting to do business with you because they view you as not being credible and reliable. Now, however, the Southerners did support Hamilton after Congress agreed to build the new capital city in the South. This would be what we now know today as Washington, D.C. In 1791, Congress created the National Bank. Americans disagreed over whether the Constitution gave government this power. So if you were in the North, you pointed to that the Constitution said you could make a law that's necessary and proper. Now, we don't know what that means, necessary and proper, but Hamilton said that that would definitely include a national bank because that would help the nation with its economic interests. Whereas the South said it's unconstitutional. It's not in the Constitution. It should be thus left up to the states. Since the nation's founding, Americans had debated over the balance of power between the states and the federal government. This is the main issue. So again, if you look at federal power on the left, the Constitution gave the federal government many significant powers. That's delegated power. It's written in the Constitution. State power would be the 10th Amendment. That's power that's reserved to the states and the people. So again, this issue of a national bank, our country's brand new. There's a lot of arguments. Remember, this slideshow is about causes of the Civil War. So my point is that the causes of the Civil War didn't happen just a few years prior. Another problem the U.S. faced after the War of 1812 was foreign competition. We wanted our economy strong and not weak. Could you have tariffs, and would that help? So prior to the war, the Embargo Act, that was Thomas Jefferson, kept British goods out of the U.S. That was to punish Britain for its impressing our sailors. Well, this helped American industry grow rapidly. After the war, Britain wanted to sell their goods in the U.S., and then this caused our economy to suffer because we didn't have an embargo against Britain after the war. So Britain began dumping their goods into the American market. Britain produced goods more cheaply. They had a more refined manufacturing base. That goes back to the 1600s. Okay, many New England businesses failed, whereas factory owners wanted Congress to protect them. And because most merchants were in the North. Congress responded with the Tariff of 1816, which put a tax on many foreign products. Tariffs helped northern factories compete. Many northerners supported tariffs. So if you're a business owner in the North, you would have been supportive of a tariff. Tariffs forced Southerners to pay more for goods, thus most Southerners opposed high tariffs. This sounds a bit strange, but the South still had trade deals with Britain. This goes back to the 1600s. You would think they would trade with the North, but they didn't. They had trade deals with Britain. So a tariff would hurt the South, and that's why they were upset about this. I've showed you this in class before. This is a review, but if you look at the chart here, this can help understand why a tariff would be successful. So ultimately, the United States and Great Britain, you could see that the U.S., it costs more to produce cloth. It costs more to manufacture it, slightly less to ship it because you're domestic. However, when you add a $1.50 tariff for Great Britain, you could see that the overall price of the product in the United States would be cheaper. So again, this would be the benefit of a tariff. Okay. The North thought high tariffs would benefit the entire country. They felt that it would bring wealth for manufacturers, and again, the South and the West, that northern manufacturers could afford to buy their own farm products, and government could use revenue to improve infrastructure. So it could help the South, it could help the West, infrastructure being railroads and roads, canals, okay, the telegraph, all kind of things. That's what the North is thinking about. In 1828, the debate over states' rights reached a crisis level. Congress passed a law raising tariffs on iron, textiles, and other products. Vice President then, John C. Calhoun, agreed with the Southerners. He argued that the states had the right of nullification. Remember, that means to cancel a federal law. So manufacturers in the North and some parts of the West supported the law. Remember, they wanted roads, they wanted infrastructure. Whereas Southerners, though, they felt the law was unfair, made them pay more for goods. Because remember, the South is not buying goods from the North, right? They're buying their goods from manufacturing in England. So tariffs are a big cause of the Civil War. Again, arguments for nullification, that means to cancel a federal law. The arguments again stated that America was formed from an agreement between the states. States kept certain powers, and states could thus nullify an unjust law. Arguments against nullification said that America was formed by the entire American people. Daniel Webster argued that we are all agents of the same supreme power, the people. So I want you to think about this for a second, because again, ultimately, when the South secedes, okay, and pulls back from the United States, this would be a reason, okay? This very slide right here. All right, moving on to a slightly different topic. All right, African Americans in the North faced discrimination. Slavery had largely ended in the North by the early 1800s, okay, even though slavery is legal, but free African Americans did not receive the same treatment as whites. Now, there was a lot of discrimination in the North. Suffrage would be voting, so African Americans were often denied the right to vote. The job market in the North for people of color, again, African Americans were not allowed to work in factories or skilled trades. Most employers preferred to hire whites. Schools, public facilities, churches were segregated, so African Americans formed their own churches. They had their own schools, etc. And then the media. White newspapers often portrayed African Americans as inferior. And again, Americans started their own newspapers. All right, how did cotton affect the social and economic life of the South? A boom in textiles, that means clothing, caused by the Industrial Revolution, created a huge demand for cotton. So again, as the country is growing, there's a high demand for textiles or cotton. The South's economy became dependent on cotton, and cotton plantations became dependent on slave labor. So whereas back to Jamestown in 1607 and onward, tobacco was a lifesaver for the colony of Virginia. Well, now we're seeing that cotton is going to be the crop of the South. In the North, the Industrial Revolution caused industry, immigration, and cities to grow. The South remained largely rural as plantations grew wealthy from the cotton trade. So because it was king cotton, cotton was the crop, and the South just focused on agriculture. So the South did not change even from colonial times. It didn't have a mixture of agriculture and business. It was just largely agricultural. Before the introduction of the cotton gin, laborers had to pick seeds out of the cotton by hand, which was a very slow process. In 1793, Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin for short. The cotton gin greatly sped up the processing of cotton and made it much more profitable. So remember, you need textiles, that's clothing. Well, you need cotton. You didn't have synthetic materials like we do today. But again, the cotton gin was making it a lot easier to pull the seeds out of cotton. You can see from the graph here, in 1790, planters grew 1.5 million pounds of cotton, but by 1820, they grew 10 times as much. So 1860 is 1 year before the Civil War started. So you could see that cotton, guys, the demand and desire for it just increased every single decade. So it's fair to say that the South, it needed cotton. Cotton was part of its whole industry. Cotton became the greatest source of wealth for the U.S., enriching northern bankers and ship owners, and then again southern planters. To keep up with the demand for cotton and the new ability to process it quickly, planters used more slave labor. So from 1790 to 1860, the price of a slave increased 10 to 20 times. So the growth of slavery, you can see, because of cotton, and you needed that manual labor to pick the seeds out of cotton. Every decade, you could see that slavery grew. So it's fair to say that slavery was needed by the South, okay, for their agriculture. Enslaved African Americans had no rights at all, and their lives were controlled by slave codes. So lives of enslaved Africans in the South. So again, some enslaved African Americans worked on their owners' homes. Most did heavy farm labor. So it would be rare to find slaves in a more of a talented profession. They were used mainly for manual labor. Working conditions were tough. Many slaves were worked close to death, whipped for punishment. Many owners saw their slaves as property and tried to keep them healthy so they would be productive. So again, generally, if you treated your slave incredibly bad, then they're not going to work because they're physically ill and sick. Owners often broke apart slave families by selling family members. So again, that was one of those sad byproducts of slavery, that families, the chain of family was broken. Many enslaved African Americans resisted slaveholders by working slowly, breaking equipment, fleeing to freedom in the North, and rebelling. In 1831, Nat Turner said that he was told to kill whites in a vision. He led a famous but doomed slave revolt. Now, whites retaliated by killing many innocent African Americans. So remember, this slideshow is about causes of the Civil War. So think of cotton. Would be fair to say that cotton was a cause of the Civil War. Tariffs, okay, the National Bank, Nat Turner here. These are all reasons that, many reasons that caused the Civil War. After 1808, it was illegal to import enslaved Africans to the U.S. This was a compromise in the Constitution. By the 1830s, some Northerners were pushing for slavery to be banned. So slavery is going to become an issue as well in the Civil War. Supporters of slavery said that it was more humane than the free labor system of the North. Critics of slavery said that slaves suffered abuse from white owners. So people in the South said, well, the North is no better because they treat their immigrants that work in their factories like dirt. And then the people in the North said that the Southern plantation owners treat their slaves like dirt. So there was blame shifting on both sides. Many Southern whites accepted the system of slavery, fearing violent uprisings would follow if control over slaves was weakened. So again, if you look at the white population in the South versus enslaved population, just depends on the particular state. Virginia, you could see, had a greater white population than slaves, but again, South Carolina had more slaves than the white population. So slavery was definitely more so in the South. About 6% of the 4 million African Americans in the South were free. So that's not much at all. Many of the free African Americans made valuable contributions. You could see that there was sugar refining, okay, seed planting devices, and again, so Norbert Rillieux, Henry Blair, they invented things that made contributions. Obstacles faced by free African Americans in the South. Free African Americans were given only the most menial jobs. They were discouraged from traveling. There was no public school for them. They couldn't vote, serve on juries, or testify against white defendants in court. And slave catchers often kidnapped them and sold them into slavery. So again, even if you were free in the South as a person of color, things were pretty rough. In the Southern Cotton Kingdom, society was dominated by a small group of wealthy plantation owners. But more than half of all Southern farmers did not have slaves. Instead of growing cotton, these people often grew corn and raised hogs and chickens. So the Cotton Kingdom was, like I said, mainly of the southern plantations. So most southern farmers didn't have slaves due to the expense of slavery. Differences between southern states. Again, Alabama, Mississippi-like states, they were cotton states, large populations of enslaved people, whereas states further north like Kentucky, they grew less cotton and had smaller populations of enslaved people. All right, new roads, turnpikes, and canals enabled northerners and southerners to move west. So moving west is going to be a cause of the Civil War. Westward expansion threatened to upset the balance between free and slave states and move the nation closer to war. You can see here that western expansion strengthened the U.S., but it also caused disagreements over the extension of slavery. In 1819, the U.S. consisted of 11 free states, which prohibited slavery. Okay, that would be like Ohio, and 11 slave states, which permitted slavery. So you can look at the chart there, and you can see that it's very close. You've got free states and slave states, and as we go west, people that lived in free states wanted these new territories to become free states, and then slave states, as we went west, wanted these new territories to become slave states. However, Missouri had been seeking admission to the United States as a slave state since 1817. Northerners did not want to add a slave state to the United States. It was important to maintain a balance between representation of slave states and free states in the Senate. Because remember, every state gets two votes, and as we go west, new states are being formed, and thus you're going to get 2 senators and as many representatives based on population. So, a solution to the problem with Missouri presented itself when Maine, a state that prohibited slavery, applied for admission to the Union. In 1820, Senator Henry Clay persuaded Congress to adopt the Missouri Compromise. So the Missouri Compromise, for the North, Maine was admitted as a free state, and then the Louisiana Territory north of the southern Missouri border would be free. Okay, so we're getting into some kind of systematic line here. For the South, Missouri was admitted as a slave state, and that southern slave owners could pursue escaped slaves into free states. So again, this is trying to deal with the extension of slavery out west. The compromise preserved the balance of power between slave and free states. So again, Maine goes in as a free state, and Missouri goes in as a slave state. So you could see that on the map here. The green would be slave states and territories. The gold color would be free states. And then again, the pink area would be closed to slavery, because remember, this is north, of Missouri here. So again, there's some way to try to limit slavery as the nation moves west. The Missouri Compromise revealed how much sectional rivalries divided the Union. Southerners were unhappy that Congress was making laws about slavery. Northerners were angry that Congress had allowed slavery to expand into another state. In time, the issue of slavery would split the United States. So slavery, again, the representation in Congress, this is definitely tearing the nation apart. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 temporarily quieted the differences between the North and South. However, new territory added as a result of America's victory in the Mexican-American War renewed the conflict. So from 1820 to 1848, the balance of power between North and South held. So you had 15 free states, you had 15 slave states. So this isn't solving anything, but it's at least a balance. The tie could be broken by new territory gained in the Mexican-American War. So you could see this area circled. What's going to happen with these new states? How would they vote? Even before the Mexican-American War had ended, politicians argued over what to do. So the Wilmot Proviso, this is Representative David Wilmot from Pennsylvania, proposed a ban on slavery in all Mexican cession territories. So the bill passed in the House, but not in the Senate. Still, it angered Southerners who viewed the bill as an attack on slavery by the North. So you can see that here, that the House most likely was made up of Northerners, had a balance, and then the Senate was made up mainly of Southerners. What was the Compromise of 1850, and why did it fail? So again, in addition to the Missouri Compromise, 1820, Congress passed the Compromise of 1850. This is a series of laws meant to solve the controversy over slavery. The bitterness between the North and South caused all attempts at compromise to fail. So again, the Compromise of 1850 included 5 laws that addressed issues related to slavery. So again, we just talked about that Wilmot Proviso. What would you do with these territories out west? Well, Clay's Compromise stated that Congress would admit California as a free state. The people of the territories of New Mexico and Utah would decide the slavery question by popular sovereignty. In other words, they would just vote in that area to see what they want their state to be. The slave trade, but not slavery, would be ended in Washington, D.C. So there would be no slave trade in Washington, D.C. Congress would pass a strict new fugitive slave law, and Texas would give up its claims to New Mexico in return for $10 million. So there's a lot of politics about trying to settle the West and the issue of slavery. President Fillmore signed the Compromise into law. Some of the new laws pleased the North and others pleased the South. So it wasn't like it satisfied everybody. To please the North, California admitted to the Union as a free state. So the North was happy with that. They were happy with the slave train banned in D.C. The South was pleased by popular sovereignty, that the people could choose, right, and to decide what to do with the rest of the Mexican cession, like, again, Arizona, New Mexico, etc. And they were happy about this tough new fugitive slave law. We'll get back to the fugitive slave law in a second. Again, the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 allowed officials to arrest anyone accused of being a runaway slave, and suspects had no rights to a trial. Northern citizens were required to help capture accused runaways, and again, this obviously didn't make the North happy. So you'd have slave traders in northern states trying to locate runaway slaves, and this just created tension. Slave catchers would seize fugitives even after many years had passed since their escape. An Indiana man was separated from his wife and children when a slave owner claimed he had escaped 19 years earlier. A wealthy tailor was seized, but his friends in New York quickly raised money to free him. So, again, there's a lot of how long could you pursue somebody? This just created tension. Again, the Fugitive Slave Act was the most controversial part of the Compromise of 1850. Senator Calhoun hoped that it would force Northerners to admit that slave owners had rights to their property. Instead, it convinced more Northerners that slavery was evil. Northerners began to resist the law. Harriet Beecher Stowe, the daughter of an abolitionist minister, was deeply affected by the fugitive slave law. In 1853, Stowe published the novel Uncle Tom's Cabin about an enslaved man who is abused by his cruel owner. Stowe's novel provoked strong reactions from people on both sides of the slavery issue. Most Northerners were shocked and began to view slavery as a serious moral problem rather than a political issue, whereas many white Southerners said it was propaganda, misleading information meant to further a cause. So the South said that, this wasn't true. The debate over slavery continued with the Kansas and Nebraska territories. Southerners refused to admit the territories because they lay above the Missouri Compromise line. In 1854, Senator Stephen Douglas helped pass the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And this just stated that this allowed the people in the territories to decide the slavery issue by popular sovereignty. So once again, people would choose what they wanted to do. This undid the Missouri Compromise. Okay, so this wasn't popular. The North and South were divided over the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Southerners supported the act. They hoped that the new territories would become slave states. Northerners were outraged. They felt Douglas had betrayed them into allowing more slave states. So this is north of Missouri. So again, the country's moving closer to war. Nevertheless, the act was signed into law by President Pierce. Thousands of pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers immediately poured into Kansas. Each side wanted to hold a majority in the vote on slavery. So Kansas soon had two governments, one anti-slavery and one pro-slavery, and you could see that on the map. So this is going to just create a lot of violence and tension. Violence breaks out. Bands of fighters begin roaming the territory, terrorizing those who did not support their views. The violence was so bad that it earned Kansas the name Bleeding Kansas. The violence in Kansas spread over into the United States Senate. Abolitionist, that's a person who's against slavery, Charles Sumner spoke out against pro-slavery Senator Andrew Butler. Butler's nephew beat Sumner unconscious in the Senate chamber. So you had a physical fight right in the Senate chamber. So by 1856, all attempts at compromise had failed, and the Civil War would start in 4 years. Another important event, the Dred Scott decision. This was one of the most controversial events preceding the Civil War. Dred Scott was a slave who had lived with his owner in a free state before returning to the slave state of Missouri. Scott argued that time spent in a free state entitled him to emancipation, that's freedom. The court decided that no black, free or slave, could claim U.S. citizenship, and therefore blacks were unable to petition the court for their freedom. The Dred Scott decision outraged abolitionists and heightened North-South tensions. So this is from the Supreme Court. All right, the election of 1860 is another cause of the Civil War. So the Republican Party nominated Abraham Lincoln. Again, this is a new party. This is not associated with the Democratic Republicans started by Jefferson. The Republican Party by Lincoln is the party of the North. The Republican Party said that slavery should be left alone where it existed, but should not be allowed to spread into territories. With the Democratic Party split, Lincoln narrowly won the election, but he won primarily with Northern votes. His name did not even appear on most ballots in the South. In effect, the more populous North had outvoted the South. The Union was about to split apart. So many people in the South didn't even have the choice to vote for Lincoln because he wasn't even an option. He was just so unpopular in the South. All right, the South secedes. So Lincoln had promised to leave slavery alone where it existed. Southerners did not trust the Republican Party to protect their rights. And then again, in November of 1860, South Carolina secedes from the Union. So they officially leave, they quit. In February of the following year, a few months later, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, Georgia had joined South Carolina in a secession. A new nation and government called the Confederate States of America was born. Jefferson Davis became the president of the Confederate States of America. The Southern states felt justified in leaving the Union because they argued they had voluntarily entered the Union. They saw the United States Constitution as a voluntary contract among independent states. 4 more states joined the Confederate States of America in April: Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas. The capital of the Confederate States of America was Richmond, Virginia. The border states like Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, and Delaware stayed in the Union but were divided over which side to support. They played an important part of the war because of their location, and they would seriously damage the North if they seceded. And many of these states that were border states stayed in the North, and they were slave states. Most white Southerners supported secession, but people in the Appalachian region of Tennessee and Virginia opposed it. In Virginia, movement to secede from the state and rejoin the Union grew. The separate state of West Virginia joined the Union in 1863. Okay, the North's advantages and disadvantages. So the North had a larger population. They had more industry, more resources, a better banking system to help raise money, more ships, regular Navy members who were mostly loyal to the Union, a larger and more efficient railway system, and Abraham Lincoln's dedication, intelligence, skill, and humanity. Some disadvantages of the North: in order to bring the Southern states back into the Union, it would have to invade and hold the South. And many people believe the South had a good chance of winning. The South's advantages and disadvantages. Some advantages were strong support from the war from the white population, troops fighting on their own land, and superior military leadership at first, with leaders such as Robert E. Lee. Some disadvantages were a smaller population, fewer factories, fewer resources, including an inferior railroad system with fewer than half the miles of track and fewer trains than the North. And then again, the belief in states' rights that limited a strong central government power. Some of the Northern war goals. The North at first wanted to bring the Southern states back into the Union and later wanted to also end slavery. The Union's plan had 3 parts. They wanted to blockade Southern ports to prevent supplies from entering the cotton and cotton from being exported. They wanted to gain control of the Mississippi River to cut Southern supply lines and split the Confederacy, and then eventually capture Richmond, the Confederate capital. Southern war goals were to win recognition as an independent nation so the South could preserve their traditional way of life, including slavery, and reading the Constitution strictly. Its strategy included the following: holding on to as much territory as possible until the North tired of fighting, having Britain and France pressure the North to end the war, and sometimes going on the attack offensively by moving north to threaten D.C. and other northern cities. All right, the last 3 slides, when we talk about sectional issues of Western expansion. In the North generally favored high tariffs to protect businesses and avoid competition with foreign products. They supported the national bank. They favored improvement programs to create new trade routes. They opposed cheap land sales because it did not bring a lot of federal money. It also sent people out west, which meant less workers for factories. So they weren't a big fan of public land sales. And slavery. Business owners who didn't rely on slaves usually objected to it as a moral wrong. So this would be the North. Okay, the South. The Southerners imported many products, mainly from Britain. They wanted low or no tariffs to keep their prices low. The South also feared foreign countries would retaliate against the U.S. by not buying Southern cotton. The National Bank. They supported state banks and state control. They viewed national banks as unconstitutional. They didn't approve of internal improvements. They didn't see themselves as benefiting from new roads. Public land sales. They did support these efforts and allied themselves with the West. And then slavery. They supported it as vital to their agricultural way of life, and they favored extension of slavery into new territories out west. And finally, the last slide with the West. The West had no pattern of agreement for tariffs. Some supported and some did not. The National Bank distrusted banks and objected to bank policies that made it difficult to get a loan. Internal improvements were generally favored for internal improvements such as roads, canals. This enabled more people to travel west and to ship products back east. Public land sales. They did favor cheap sale of public lands as a way to acquire more farmland and attract more people out west. And slavery. They could be pro-slave or free depending on the area. So there was no one particular agreement. So Civil War causes, a lot of causes, starting all the way back from even the beginning of our country all the way up into the 1861. Thank you for listening.